If your ranch struggles with profitability, maybe it's time to consider the difference between ranching principles versus ranching practices.
A principle is like the truth that it's grounded in, okay? Mm-hmm. And then the practice is going to be how you or how I apply this principle. What I find is farmers and ranchers tend to get really hung up on practices.
Dallas Mount, owner of Ranch Management Consultants, is my guest as we discuss the danger to the lifespan of your operation when focusing on the practices keeps you from adapting to changes in the industry.
If we get stuck just doing the same thing over and over again, I mean, it's not about if your ranch will fail, it's when.
But change can be tough considering our fear of failure.
If 100% of the ideas that you implement on the place are working, well, you're probably not trying very hard.
Principles over practices. It's not necessarily a new idea, but it is revolutionary when a ranch figures it out. On this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show, and we welcome you. I'm Justin Mills. Glad to have you tuned in for our program. If you're listening, you are listening in one of the 83 countries that our program hits each and every week when we hit the broadcast button here in the Working Ranch Radio Studios. Glad to have you joining us. A few weeks ago, in fact, did a shout out to our friends listening down in Australia, and today a special shout out to our neighbors up to the north, those listening in Canada. Glad to have you tuning in each and every week as you do. And for all of you, we hope you got your July up underway in good fashion. It's been an interesting weather situation for folks all across the country this year. For some folks, it's been cooler than normal. For other folks, a little hotter than normal. Meteorologist Don Day will be stepping in towards the end of our program here today and giving us an update on what he predicts to be the look of the weather here for the next 7 to 10 days out. So be sure to join us at the very end of our program when meteorologist Don Day joins us. Up today, though, we are going to have Dallas Mount. He is the owner of Ranch Management Consultants. We've had him on our show before. He joins us again as we're going to be talking principles over practices. Now, just in general, that just sounds like pretty topical, maybe kind of wondering where that's going to go. Well, as we said in the opening, a lot of times these practices are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and we maybe do things with really not a full understanding are they the profitable things to do? Well, we're going to be looking at that and having a discussion on that, and I think you'll enjoy the program here today. Definitely one that will be a thought provoker and a show that you'll probably want to go back and listen to again. By the way, you can do that by going to our podcast site at workingranchradio.com. Now, before we get too far, I wanted to mention this. I got an email from Kayla Walker, who's the Director of Programs for the Society of Range Management. Earlier this year, we had them on as we were talking about their Good Grazing Makes Sense program. Now, they're going to be hosting an event coming up. I realize this is really short notice because it's this coming week, Tuesday, July 11th in Reno, Nevada, and it's in conjunction with U.S. Cattlemen's Association's summer business meeting, and it's entitled From the High Desert to the Hill, and it's going to be a discussion on public grazing regulations, and it's not just a discussion amongst ourselves. We're going to be some top agency leaders there, including BLM Senior Policy Advisor Errol Rice and USDA Farm Service Agency Administrator Zach Ducheneau. So two folks that will be there as part of that discussion. We know we've already had a lot of news out there in regards to some of the decisions the BLM is making on grazing decisions. So two administrators there, agency leaders that will be there to talk about that and to be able to bounce some questions off of. Again, that will be this coming Tuesday. It's going to be at the Silver Legacy Resort Casino beginning at 8:30. That is Pacific time. If you'd like more information, you can go to goodgrazing.org and find out more information on that. Right now, I would like to thank our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Allflex cattle identification and record keeping should be easy, and now you can tie your visual tag, your EID tag, and your genetic data to one management number with the Allflex match sets. Find out more at their website at allflexusa.com. Inherit Select from Zoetis, providing commercial cow-calf producers producers with genetic insights to make replacement female selections and breeding decisions. If you want to find out more, their website is inheritprogress.com. The American Gelbvieh Association, a highly fertile, moderately framed cow that raises high-performing calves even in tough environments. Now that's doing more with less. The Gelbvieh cow's efficient use of resources make her the picture of sustainability in today's modern beef industry. Find out more at gelbvieh.org. And MLS tubs. Don't gamble with fly control this summer. MLS tubs are a sure bet. All kinds of tubs for all kinds of needs. Learn more about MLS tubs at mlstubs.com. And finally, Tank Toad, your remote water monitoring systems, all from the convenience of your phone, powered by solar, satellite, and cell. To find out more, you can give them a call at 801-252-6135 or check them on their website at tanktoad.com. It's what we use here on the X-Ring Ranch. Well, the Captain, Tim O'Byrne, is on the road this week. He is up in Calgary, Canada for the Beef Improvement Federation Convention. Sounds like he's had a good time and a lot of great information. He's been shooting emails back and forth about some of the speakers he's heard, some of the information. So I'm looking forward to visiting with him about all that he heard there in Calgary for the latest Beef Improvement Federation's convention. He'll be back next week, so be sure to tune in next week as he will be back on for his edition of Tim's 2 Cents. Well, stay with us. We'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll get into our featured topic here today as we are talking principles over practices. If you're scratching your head a little bit, well, stay tuned. You're going to find out what all that means when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Don't gamble with fly control this summer. MLS tubs are a sure bet. MLS high-performance, low-moisture cooked molasses tubs provide controlled, consistent supplement delivery to your cattle, horses, sheep, and goats. MLS takes pride in their line of products that are proven to lower your feed supplement costs. All kinds of tubs for all kinds of needs. Learn more about MLS tubs at mlstubs.com.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills, as we head now into our featured interview and topic here for the day. Joining me is Dallas Mount. We've had Dallas on before. He's the owner of Ranch Management Consultants, the schools ranching for profit that are available out there, also the Executive Link programs. And Dallas, glad to have you back here with us on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you, Justin. It's always fun to be on with you.
Well, it's been a while since we've chatted. I think the last conversation you and I had was at the first of the year. We kicked off the 2023 year with episode 100, and it was why Junior shouldn't come back to the ranch. A catchy, something that was kind of catchy there. And coincidentally, I was looking back over some of the top shows since I've been doing this program for Working Ranch Radio Show, and one of the shows that comes up in the top, I don't know, it's definitely in the top 10. I'm not sure where it's at in there, is episode 62 that you did on why own cows. You still believe that was an interesting show?
That was. I was probably on a bit of a kick because I was coming off doing a lot of schools where we were looking at really low gross margins in cow herds, yeah. Right? And so that was probably a bit of a kick. But I still stand by the fact that of all the different things that we look at from people that have ranches and run livestock, owned cow calf is one of the least profitable things consistently. Mm-hmm. Right now, I want to be clear. It doesn't mean it can't be profitable.
Sure.
Right. I mean, there's certainly ways to do it that work. But from, of all the different things we look at, if you had to stack them up from enterprises that are highly profitable to those that are least profitable, owned cow calf would traditionally be among the least profitable thing a person can do with grass and cattle.
Well, and our topic here today is going to touch on maybe a question I would have in regards to that particular show, because we're going to talk about how we as ranchers need to be looking at how do we adapt and change to different things. And as we were getting on before we went on air here, and we talked about our title of our show today, you said, "Boy, I don't know if that seems too scholastic, or so it doesn't sound real catchy." Our title, "Principles Over Practice," and I said, "Well, I didn't mind it. I didn't think it was too bad, but it's definitely not as catchy as the last shows you've done, but as you and I go ahead.
I don't want to be academic with, standing with my white coat on and my spectacles, right?
Yeah.
So I like to keep things a little grounded, but yeah.
I thought it sounded fine. I think it'll be a good show because I understand where you're coming from a little bit, but I want you to go a little bit more. When you said, when we were talking before we scheduled the interview, you said, here's a topic I was wanting to do, principles over practice. So let's just start. I mean, what the heck are you talking about there?
Okay. Yeah. So let's think of the words there, right? So principles versus a practice, right? So if I was going to define the word principle, right? I often ask groups to do this with me, and some things I hear are like, a foundation, the thought behind it is what people say. And the thing I really like is when somebody uses the word a truth, right? To me, that really speaks well to it. So a principle is like the truth that it's grounded in. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then the practice is going to be how you or how I apply this principle. Okay. So a really good example of that would be like one of the grazing principles we teach at the school. The principle is allow the plant's appropriate recovery. So like when we're working with clients down, Florida, Louisiana, South Texas, right? Appropriate recovery for them might mean 30 days, right? 35 days, mm-hmm. right? We get up into the drier parts of the world and you say, okay, I'm going to graze this plant in June. What does appropriate recovery look like? And for many parts of the world, that means not till next year, right? Or sometimes even longer than that. There's some people that are saying, hey, like 18 months is what's appropriate in my environment. So the principle would be allow the plant's appropriate recovery. The practice, how you apply that, can look extremely different with your ranch, with your environment, with your challenges, with your goals. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean is let's keep our conversation focused on principles, mm-hmm. and we can discuss and debate principles and dive into them and dig in. And then when it comes to, okay, now how am I going to apply this principle on my ranch, right? That can look all over the board. But what I find is farmers and ranchers tend to get really hung up on practices.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know as we were talking before we went on air, you said, one of the things that you really see as folks are coming to your schools and as you're visiting with folks out in the countryside is it's almost like everybody wants this, let me just buy this management package off the shelf and then boom, my ranch will be profitable. And it's not quite that simple.
It's not that simple. It is not that simple. But I think that's kind of the way we're trained to think, from early on is like, okay, what do you use, right? What do you do? What do you, how long are you grazing here? Or what kind of animals are you running? What breed of cattle are you running? What bulls are you using, right? All these practices that people get caught up in, and they feel like if I could just find the right combination of these practices, then I can just go on autopilot and follow the recipe every year and the ranch will work. And it's not near that simple. I mean, when I was with Extension, the phone would always ring and one of the common questions would be, what do I plant or what do I spray this with? Right. Those would be probably the two most common questions is, hey, I've got this field out here that's looking really bad. What should I plant? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, I've got these, horses that I'm trying to graze on this thing and all, none of the grasses are keeping and all the weeds are coming on. So what do I need to plant? Okay. Well, obviously anybody that knows anything about, these things is what they plant is really irrelevant, right? I mean, if they don't get their grazing right, if they don't allow recovery time to happen, what you plant doesn't matter. But yet that's what they were looking for is hand me the solution in a bag, in a bottle, in a block, right? Whatever the thing is, let me write you a check for it, and then I'm going to go on down the road. And it frustrates me that people aren't asking better questions, right? Aren't looking for, okay, what's the underlying cause of why this is going on, or what's the principle, and then figuring out how do I apply that principle to help me get to a better place. Mm-hmm.
Well, and you had mentioned a bit ago too. You said it's kind of our society, kind of where we're at culturally, that we just figure that, and part of it is with the technology that we have nowadays. People can post, here's the results I got when I did this or when I did that. And there's not much taken into account, as you said before, in terms of, well, where are you physically at? What were the conditions? There was a lot of different variables there. And we just have a tendency to want to really just, well, let's just, if that worked for him in southeast Oklahoma, well, it's got to work for me in northeast Wyoming.
Yeah, that's right. And we that have been ranching a while realize there's a lot more to it, right? The guys at Soil Health Academy would use the word context, right? There's a lot of different contexts we could put those things into. So kind of circling back around to our conversation about the cows, right? Is I get a lot of people that would say, well, what do you think? Should I run yearlings or should I run cows? Right. Well, that's looking for a recipe, right? I can't hand you a recipe to say what's right for you. So the principles that we teach around that are, okay, let's figure out what our overheads are, figure out what our gross margin is of this enterprise, and then figure out what our profit target is, right? So we need those three pieces to really start to answer the question. Okay. So if I know that maybe Justin, maybe you bought a ranch and maybe you're trying to service some land debt on that thing. So that needs to be part of your profit target is servicing that land debt. And then we're going to look at your overheads, right? It's maybe you and another employee, right? And then all the things that your ranch has. So now we've got your profit target and we've got your overheads. Well, now we can go back to it and say, okay, how many animals could I run? What could be the scale of my business? And then what kind of gross margin do I need to hit those targets? Right. If we can do that gross margin with a cow herd that you've got on hand, well, then who am I to tell you shouldn't run cows? Right. I mean, if you can achieve your targets with those things, that's what you want to do. That's what that's what your passions are, and knock yourself out. Right. If we get to that answer and you're showing me a gross margin that's $250 a cow, but we need a $500 gross margin to hit these targets. Well, it's back to the drawing board for you, right? Because now we need to plan that thing out. So that's part of what I mean when I say let's look at the principles and then let's figure out how to apply those to the situation.
Yeah. So back to those real quick. The principles, you said overhead, gross margin. What was the third thing you'd mentioned?
Profit target. So, and those, I mean, that would be the starting point really. And then we start to analyze, okay, enterprise mix. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yes. You got it. So we're going to figure out what is the profit target that you need to hit. And some of that might be related to debt service. Some of that might be, hey, I want to put away X amount per year for retirement, right? Or those kind of things. Some people's profit target might be zero, right? If they would really be content and happy with nothing in profit, well, that's for them to decide, not for me to decide, right? So what's your profit target? What's the overhead structure of the ranch? So then we add profits plus overheads, right? So then that number, so if you've got a $100,000 profit target, your ranch is $300,000 of overheads, the things to keep the doors open on the ranch. So now we add those two together, we got a $400,000 gross margin target. Okay, so that's what we need to service with gross margin from the animals. So keeping the math simple, if you've got a cow that produces a $400 gross margin, if we can run 1,000 cows on your place, we're there, right? So we're gonna cover those things. If you have a $400 gross margin, you tell me, well, I'm only sized to run 500 of them, right? Well, in order to hit those, we need to figure out something that's got an $800 gross margin target, right? So that's kind of how we use that when we look at the economic principles and how do we apply those to a situation.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Dallas Mountain, my guest today. He is owner of Ranch Management Consultants. We're talking the overall title is Principles Over Practice. We've got a lot more to talk about as we look at this. We've already talked about a few things that give us a basis. We're going to expand in that to a little bit further when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. A sustainable ranch is one that can do more with less. And for beef producers, it can start right at the herd level with a cow that's efficient with her resources and environment. And in today's modern industry, Gelbvieh females are the picture of sustainability. Gelbvieh and Balancer cattle are early maturing with maternal superiority through increased longevity, added fertility, and more pounds of calf wean per cow exposed. Adaptable, versatile, and sustainable. All factors that have a positive impact on your bottom line. Gelbvieh influenced females, the smart, reliable, and profitable maternal choice for achieving sustainability in today's modern beef industry. Be sustainable, breed Gelbvieh. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today is Dallas Mount, owner of Ranch Management Consultants. We've had him on the show here a few times. Dallas, you've been on it, 3 or 4 times, I think, and I appreciate it. You always jumping in and being on the show as you are out there on a very regular basis, not only through your schools, but even yourself, grazing cattle yourself. You do your own thing as well, but you come at it with a lot of perspective that for a lot of us we don't know. So I appreciate the balance that you bring into this, the conversation on some of these topics that we have. Our subject here today is principles over practice, and as we were at break here, Dallas, one of the thoughts that got me to thinking about this, I think the reason that we do have a lot of folks seeking ways in which they can have more profitable or more profitable ranches is that we've got decades and decades of years of just purely focusing on the practice. And like you were saying in the first segment, it's like, this idea that, if it works here, it's got to work on my place with the exact same, we're going to add the same recipe, the same exact ingredients into the deal. And I expect whatever happens in one area of the country should happen in my area of the country. And I felt like as we were at break here, that's kind of one of why you have a pretty good living in a way, and of teaching guys that, you need to step away from just focusing on what grandpa did, what dad did, and nothing against them other than things change. Things really do change, whether it's the price of cattle to our input costs and different things like that. Things have changed since 1952. And I really feel like that's the basis of what really propels essentially your business.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that perspective. It's an interesting thing to think about the ways that we've done business over the time, and we've been in this ranching game for a while. So we've seen a lot of things shift. And I really appreciate thinking back to the generations that have come before us, and the things that they did then were right. They worked, but those things aren't working anymore. Right. And a lot of those things were based on very different economic, situations. So, it's easy enough to think about, okay, what's a weaned calf worth today, and how many weaned calves would it take to buy a pickup? Mm-hmm. Right. How many weaned calves does it take to support one full-time employee today versus what it did, heck, even 10 years ago? That thing's moved, right? And the same thing can be true for crops and all those things, right? How many weaned calves does it take to pay your utility bill for your house, right? Mm-hmm. To re-roof the house when it's time to be done. So all these costs of doing business and the relationships between the products that we're producing and the cost to raise them are constantly moving. Mm-hmm. And so we have to always be reevaluating those things. If we get stuck just doing the same thing over and over again, it's not about if your ranch will fail, it's when the ranch will fail. There's a great quote from Toby Holstead, and I'm not sure where Toby got it from, but he's the one I heard say it is he said, one of the most dangerous things to do is to do things the way grandpa did them. And one of the most dangerous things to do is to forget why he did things the way he did. Right. I didn't get that quite exactly right, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah,
I do. And when I say that comment about do what grandpa did or do what dad did, I don't say that. And I'm very cautious. I don't know that maybe I get that across. That's not a disrespectful statement, because there's many of us that wouldn't have a ranch if grandpa didn't do what he did.
That's right.
That's right. So it's with a lot of caution I say that. However, like you said, things change. Things have changed. Just for example, the way my dad marketed cattle, he marketed cattle the best way there was at the time, to where how I market cattle are different because times have changed. Technology has changed, and that's just part of that deal. So back to our conversation as we were talking about that a bit ago in the first segment, you were talking about some of the economic principles, such as our overheads, knowing what our overheads, identifying those overheads, knowing what our what do we want to, how profitable we want to be? What's that target goal? What's that going to be? That's a principle. And then gross margins as well. Let's get into gross margins a little bit and define that just a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because that's not a term that's commonly used in agriculture. Unfortunately, I'd love to change that. I mean, I wish that was the common coffee shop talk is what's your gross margin on this set of cows, right? Or what's your gross margin on this field of corn, right? But let's define that. So the way we do gross margins and the way we teach people to do it at the Ranching for Profit School is step number one, we figure out our gross product. Okay, and gross product is the value of our production. Okay. Let me give you an example of gross products so that it makes sense. If I'm going to go out and buy some stocker calves in the spring and I buy $100,000 of stocker calves in the spring, right? Bring the truck in, open the door, turn them out. And I'm going to sell these stocker cattle in the fall. So in the fall, I go out there, I gather up what survived the year, put them on a truck and I sell them, and I sell $130,000 of calves in the fall. Okay. So I bought 100,000, sold 130,000. The gross product is the value I created. Okay. Now I didn't create 130,000. I bought 100,000 of that, right? The part I created was the 30,000. Okay. So your gross product is your value of production. Okay. What did you actually create? So when we do a cow herd, gross product is a combination of a lot of things. So because in a cow herd, there's a lot of moving parts, right? There's steer calves leaving, heifer calves leaving, cull cows leaving, but then, maybe there's replacement heifers staying on. Maybe there's last year's replacement heifers that are now bred heifers, last year's bred heifers that are now cows, right? So we've got all these moving pieces. So gross product of a cow herd is the sales minus the purchases with an inventory change in there, right? So we value the inventory at the beginning of the year, end of the year. Okay. So I'm giving you a long-winded answer. Sorry about that. So step number one is to calculate gross product. What's the value you created? Step number two is to total up all your direct costs. Okay. Now your direct costs are those things that change proportionally as the units of production change. So if I run one more cow, this cost goes up by one. So the ones to think about for a cow herd would be things like fed feed, right? If I run one more cow, I'm going to buy one more ton of hay, right? If I run one more cow, I'm going to buy one more bag of mineral. Okay. So those things that go up proportionally. Other examples that would be like your veterinary, vaccines, things like that, marketing commissions. Every time you sell one more calf, you pay one more commission, right? So we take our gross product minus our direct costs, and that leaves us our gross margin. Okay, so gross margin, it's the gross product minus the direct cost. Now, this is really important because what most people think about with their costs, they take all their costs and they dump them into one bucket, right? So they're looking at what's my production minus my costs, and do I have any money left over, right? Well, that doesn't really tell you if that enterprise is working. Okay. The only thing that tells you that is gross margin and gross margin per unit, to be more specific. So a nice example of that would be like spring cows and fall cows. Yeah. Right. So if I'm actually doing those numbers, I'm going to have a gross margin per unit on my spring cows and a gross margin per unit on my fall cows. And one of those is going to be better. Okay, I would bet one of them is significantly better. So that's useful information because that tells you how the enterprises are actually working.
So let's take that a step further, Dallas, because there's a couple things with that. And I think one of them you addressed earlier when you say, well, what's your profit target? What do we need to be at the end of the year so that we are profitable? But let's go back to that. And when you get that gross margin number, in most cases, we hope that's a positive number. But just because it's a positive number doesn't necessarily mean that's working. You know what I'm saying? And maybe that's getting back to, okay, then what's our profit target? So how do we look at that gross margin number then? I mean, we can definitely use that gross margin number if we've got multiple enterprises to see which one's the best, but maybe we're a singular enterprise. When we look at that number, how do we evaluate that to know, are we making it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is pretty simple. Does it meet your target?
Okay.
So if I've got, my overheads plus my profit target of X, is that gross margin going to hit that? Okay. And if it does, then we can say, okay, well, now I kind of got the green light to, if this is what I want to do, I got the green light to do it. If it doesn't hit that, then we either need to go back in and work on the enterprise, see if we can make it better, or we go back to the drawing board and say, well, what other enterprises could I put on this that might have a stronger gross margin? You brought up an interesting point there, Justin. You said we hope it's positive. This is something I've been seeing more and more, and maybe it's always been going on. Maybe I've just been naive to pay attention to it. There's a lot of excitement out there about ecology, about soil health, which I love, right? I think this is a great thing to be excited about. But a lot of people get excited about building soil health and about getting good at their grazing so that they can run more animals, whatever they're doing, right? If they're running cows, if they're running stockers, they're like, hey, I'm gonna get good at building soil health. I'm gonna get good at grazing so I can run more cows. Okay. Well, I've come into some of these pictures and we actually dig in and look at their gross margins, and sometimes their gross margins are negative.
Oh, wow.
Right. So yeah. So if you're saying, well, I'm currently running 200 cows and I'm going to get good at my grazing and I'm going to run 400, and you've got a negative gross margin, well, what's going to happen when you hit the gas on an enterprise that has a negative gross margin? You're going to go broke faster. Right. So it's really important, and I think oftentimes people just assume, well, my cows are working or whatever I'm doing is working. And I think that's a dangerous assumption. If you actually don't know what those gross margins are of whatever enterprise you're doing, run them. And then next year, run them again, because markets are going to change, input prices are going to change. Just because they were, I have some people that tell me, well, I ran my margins 3 years ago and they were $350. Well, heck, the way the markets have been moving this year, if you ran those numbers 6 months ago, you're behind. I mean, they've changed drastically.
Yeah. So. Yeah. That's a good point. That's an interesting perspective. And as we get into our next segment, folks, we're going to take a break here. We're going to go a little bit further into something that Dallas said that sparked my question that I wrote down here. I'll share that question with you all and with him when we come back here. You're listening to the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Every year you pick your replacement heifers. Some become profitable cows. Others disappoint. How can you make more reliable selections? Genetic testing. Commercial cow-calf producers like you are using Inherit Select from Zoetis. You gain valuable predictions, including cow fertility, size and soundness, feed efficiency, growth and carcass merit, as well as easy-to-use economic indexes. This improves your selection, breeding, and marketing decisions. Request a call from InheritProgress.com and ask about free TSUs to get you started.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today, Dallas Mount, owner of Ranch Management Consultants. As we were talking about, he meets with a lot of producers throughout the course of a 12-month period and through his career as a teacher, and now owner of Ranch Management Consultants with ranchers all across the country with their Ranching for Profit School and also their Executive Link program. Our topic here today that we're talking is principles over practice. And as we were talking in the first segment, the element of applying principles, those principles can be applied to wherever you're at in the country, where practices could be a little bit different, and you have to be adapting to those things. As you were finishing up in our last segment, Dallas, you touched a little bit on soil management, and it got me to thinking this. And as we were talking a bit in the break, I'm not going to downplay the importance of that we are as ranchers and our industry managing our soil and doing what we can from grazing principles that are benefit to our soil health. But one of the things that I was thinking about a little bit is in different times of our industry, there's fads that come through. And I feel like as you were talking about that sometimes there's a focus on the fads, and when in reality, there's not a focus on the principles. And if we want to try to keep for ourselves from getting caught up in the fads, there might be some things that are very valid. But if we want to not get caught up in the fads and lose our hind end in the fads, we really have to focus on the principles.
Yeah, that's interesting, Justin. As I've been playing this game now for a few decades, there's been a lot of things that have kind of come and gone, right? We get an interest on something and it feels like everybody's running to that. And then in a few years, some of those things are a flash in the pan and they're out. And I don't think by any means the soil health thing is going to be a flash in the pan. Some of the practices around the soil health stuff, we're probably going to learn, well, that was a distraction, right? But the principles, and I really want to take my hat off to the Soil Health Academy, Understanding Ag, that group that's come up with those soil health principles. I mean, those are truths, right? They're foundational. But a lot of these practices around that are probably going to be, well, we tried that, and now we're on to the next thing. So one of the things that I appreciate, and I know Burke Tigard, I've always looked up to Burke and what he's done. He's always impressed me that he's a lifelong learner, right? And he's got his eye on the next thing, right? He's always looking over the horizon to see what's coming. And I really appreciate that. And I look up to people that are doing that, because I often catch myself being dismissive of things that are coming along before I really should be being dismissive of those, right? I think there's a point to say, well, let's pay attention to that. And let's read on it, and let's study on it. Let's watch what's going on. But oftentimes my reaction is, well, I've been around here for 20 something years. I know what's going on. This isn't the case. This doesn't fit my model. And you can dismiss it too quickly, right? And that oftentimes does you a disservice, because now you're missing something that could really be a learning opportunity for you. So I think there's a balance, jumping on every new thing that comes down the road, and also letting yourself be dismissive. And I mentioned Burke, and one of my favorite quotes from Burke is he said, "I don't need to be on the cutting edge all the time, but I at least want to be on the blade."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he doesn't need to be the first guy through the chute, right? Taking all the arrows, but you at least want to be paying attention, right? If you could draw like a curve, the natural bell curve, right? I want to be out there in that upper 20%, right? I don't necessarily need to be on the 1% lunatic fringe, right? But I sure don't want to be back in the middle of the bell curve, because in agriculture, you're 10 years behind if you're in the middle of the bell curve. Right?
Yeah. Folks, our conversation here today, principles over practice. If it feels like you're wondering, well, what are you talking about? We talked in the first segment, as Dallas described, basically defined a principle over a practice. A principle is a truth. It's something that can be applied no matter what the situation, whereas the practice is how you apply the principle. And that allows then that truth or that principle to be applied in many different facets for different folks, and that to be workable. As we were talking about in the first segment, from a management standpoint, there's economic principles such as, figuring out what your overhead is, your gross margin, your profit targets, as we were talking about there. Different elements within our ranches for all of us, whether it's the economic side, the business side of it, whether it's our soil management side, whether it's our livestock production side, each of those have principles. And we're not able to get into all of those today, because as Dallas was saying, one of the first things is we need to know economically where we're at. Dallas, let's step into one side. We were talking a little bit about soil health a bit ago. Let's talk about some grazing principles. As we know, we can't get into every facet of management here today on a ranching situation, but grazing principles do have a big impact in terms of our overall production of our ranches.
Yes, let's do it. So we've got the 5 grazing principles that we teach at the school. These have been, these have been taught now for almost 40 years by ranch management consultants. I didn't necessarily come up with them. We have, as our instructors sat down recently and reshaped these, reworded some things. We felt like, hey, this will make this a little bit stronger. So if these are different from what you guys have heard in the past, it's because we just kind of did a freshen up on these principles. But they're really very, very similar to what we've been teaching for the last 40 years. Okay, so let's just go through them real quick. And I think one of the beauties of principles is they work everywhere, right? These work in every environment. Okay. So how you apply these might look very different. But, so principle number 1 of the GRACE principles is plan, monitor, manage. Okay. If you don't have a plan going into the growing season, right, you're already behind. Okay, so where are we going to be grazing? How long are we going to be there? How many animal units are we planning on taking out of that? Now, absolutely, that plan's going to change, right? We don't chisel that plan in stone tablets and fall on our sword following it, right? We make a plan for what we think might happen, and then as the year unfolds, we start adjusting that and replanning, which comes into the monitor and manage piece, right? So as you're grazing, we're always doing those things: plan, monitor, manage. Okay, principle number 2. Allow the plant's appropriate recovery. Okay. And we talked earlier in the segment about how that's going to be very different depending on the different environments.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Recovery is so key into building plant health, building ecosystem health, right? It is allowing appropriate recovery in all these systems. So the next one is the graze period, and it's graze period as short as possible. Okay. Get the graze period as short as possible. Now, we understand there's practical limitations to that. Right. If you're ranching in the red desert of Wyoming, it probably is not going to make sense to build infrastructure development to get 1 day grace periods. Mm-hmm. It's just not practical. Right. If you're ranching in, a 65-inch precip zone, well, that's probably going to pay. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and then everybody else is going to be on the spectrum somewhere between those things. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but the graze period, the shorter we get the graze period, the better. And it's better for animal performance. It's better for the plants. It's better for recovery. It's better for roots. It's better for soil. Okay. Mm-hmm. The next one is related to stock density. And the principle is the stock density, the higher, the better.
Okay.
Okay. So stock density is about how many animals we have in a given space. Okay, so it doesn't have anything to do. People often confuse stock density with severity of graze. Okay, we can have really high stock density and still graze things lightly. Okay, we can have really low stock density and graze things extremely heavy. Right, the example of that would be one horse on a half section of land. Right, really low stock density, but they're grazing the same plants over and over and over again. Okay. So stock density, the higher, the better. Now, again, there's practical limitations here, right? Mm-hmm. If you're taking in, cattle that are not used to being managed this way, they're going to get very uncomfortable at really high stock densities, and you're going to cause animal stress. Right. And then our own abilities with stockmanship are often going to be a limiting factor of that. Right. Facility design are going to be limiting factors. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole bunch of things that are behind that. Mm-hmm. The last principle I'll give you today around the grazing principles are match stocking rate and carrying capacity. Okay. Stocking rate is a measure of our demand, and carrying capacity is a measure of our supply. So it's essentially saying we need a way to match supply and demand. Okay, and that in most all ranching environments that we work in, it's about being flexible. Mm-hmm. There's going to be years like the year you and I are having this year, Justin. I mean, we could be, calling in more trucks, right, to bring more critters because the rains have come right. Mm-hmm. They've come at the right time. Our temperatures have been great. 2 years ago, it was a completely different story, right? So we need ways to be flexible with our stocking strategy. We need ways to ramp things down when droughts occur, when other events happen. And then we need ways to let's make hay while the sun's shining when grass is growing. So those are some of the grazing principles for you. They work in every environment. How you implement them will look very different. But the principles work.
Mm-hmm. Boy, Dallas, I feel like sometimes as humans, we almost need to fight our nature of what we want to do and almost do the opposite with some of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have to remember though that why are we in business, right? What are we doing this for? And sometimes making all these changes and moving things can sometimes take some of the fun out of it. So if you're in a stage where, hey, I'm pretty comfortable with how things are, I've kind of got what I need to, doesn't mean we need to go pulling the rug out from under it. But at the same time, if you're wanting somebody to follow you and to build on what you've developed and what you've built, you better recognize they're going to need to do things differently than what you've done them, right? Mm-hmm. So having that attitude of looking at things, evaluating things, being open to change. If we're all managing our businesses for just the enjoyment of the senior generation, well, right, those businesses aren't going to be around very long. Yeah. But if we're allowing some adaptivity in there and some new ideas brought in, and I wonder, I just thought of this. What percent of ideas implemented on the place should fail? I think that's an interesting question, right? If 100% of the ideas that you implement on the place are working, well, you're probably not trying very hard, right? Yeah. I think there should be a percentage of your ideas that you're implementing that you think, well, that was dumb. Let's go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and just that mindset of not being okay with failure stifles people. And I'm speaking from my own experience. I'm not pointing fingers at other people. I'm saying that's what stifled me sometimes of making a change. Is just, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to fail at it, and that's a terrible way to look at it.
Yeah. There probably should be a percentage of them that don't work, or you're not getting deep enough into them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when you said that, you're like, man, we should just know that there should be a percentage that's going to fail, and that's okay. Everybody needs to know that's okay to do that. So, as we look at this and wrap up here, Dallas, you were talking about just the principles stay the same, the practices can change for either location, part of the country or over time, the practices can change. And I feel, for some folks are like, okay, I'm willing to make those changes, or I'm willing to adapt these principles and move forward. They do that for 3 or 4 years, and then we just kind of slump back into that rut again of like, well, I got it figured out 3 years ago, so we're just going to keep doing that. And that would be the thing of, as you were mentioning a bit about Burke Teichert and saying always having a mind of wanting to learn. I think if that's the way we can look at our ranches, of always saying, okay, I'm always out there learning. I don't have it figured out. I'm always looking at ways to adapt and to learn. That's a very healthy mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think anytime we feel like we've got it figured out, we need to slap ourselves in the face, right? Because there's something that's going to come that's going to give us a curveball that we're going to need to be on to. So, yeah, I agree. That's a healthy mindset.
You bet. Well, Dallas, I appreciate you joining us here on the show. I know you're in the summer break here a little bit. School's going to be starting up probably this fall. Maybe you've had some here a little bit in the summer, but I know the EL groups have probably been meeting through the summertime, kind of getting things lined up for the fall run.
We are, and we actually have more enrollments now than we have for quite some time. So we're getting ready to do a school in Kennewick, Washington in September. And then we've got a couple schools in December. One is in Texas. We got another one in Phoenix. We'll actually be up in Canada as well in December. That school's already full. But we've got a lot of them coming up. We've got a price change that takes effect August 1. And if you enroll before then, we give you last year's pricing. So if people are wanting to come to the school, you better get your deposits made and on there, because if you wait till after the 1st of August, you're going to be paying the new higher price. Okay, sounds good. Well, Dallas, again, their website, Ranch Management Consultants, if you want to find out more information. Dallas, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show. You bet, Justin. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me on. You bet. Dallas Mount, my guest here today, owner of Ranch Management Consultants, as they are the ones that host and put on the Ranching for Profit schools. We've talked about those from time to time. I reference that on our program. If you are interested in those schools, you can sure go to their website at ranchmanagement.com. Well, stay with us. Meteorologist Don Day steps in next as we take a look at our long-term weather when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
And we're back. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills as we head now into taking a look at our long-term weather today, brought to you by Allflex. Cattle identification and record keeping should be easy. Now you can tie your visual tag, your EID tag, and your genetic data to one management number with the Allflex Match Set. To find out more, go to their website. You can find it at allflexusa.com. And joining us as he does each and every week is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And Don, as we look ahead for getting in now, we are in the month of July and looking ahead into that. It's really setting up the way the highs and the lows are sitting in such a way that we're going to see that western half of the country really see some heat, and it kind of stretching still back down into the southern tier of the U.S.
Yeah, what has developed over the last couple of weeks is this high pressure dome that's over the far southern United States has brought the heat to Texas and the Gulf Coast. And we're starting to see that high pressure build and grow a little bit more to the north, but it's really wanting to grow more westward. Now, this is nothing unusual. Usually this time of year, we do have some type of high pressure ridge that develops over the nation's midsection, and it kind of meanders east and west, but it's being suppressed more to the south and west than maybe we would have in a normal summer due to a big area of low pressure that's up near Hudson Bay, Canada. That area of low pressure up there is quite large, and it's really not moving very much, and neither is the high pressure ridge that's in the south and the southwestern United States. So it's kind of a battle of wills between that area of low pressure in Canada that's sending cooler than average air into the northern plains, the east slopes into the Rockies and into the upper Midwest, and even into the Corn Belt and Great Lakes. Those areas really have not seen any big summer heat yet. Nothing that's lasted more than a couple of days. And the heat that's in the south and southwest is going to expand and grow to the west. So Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Utah, Nevada, California, as well as Washington, Oregon, and into Idaho. There's going to be heat in those areas I just mentioned, but you get on the other side of the mountains into the plain states. Well, that temperature air pattern is going to remain below average as we go into the next couple of weeks. And in between, you kind of get a little bit of both. So the end result is the hottest weather will be in the south and the southwest and the far west.
So a couple of questions here as where we're seeing the collision between the Canadian part of what we're seeing in our weather versus that hot area in the southwest. The in-between area that you were talking about east of the Continental Divide that's going to be cooler than normal. Are they also going to be seeing more moisture than above normal?
Well, the answer is yes. And the reason for that is that it's right along that frontal boundary, and that where that collision of air masses is going to be is where we're going to see the best chance of showers and thunderstorms. So what that means is that a lot of the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, eastern Colorado, eastern Wyoming and Montana, down into East Texas, and then across the central and southern Corn Belt states, it looks pretty wet. And that wetness is also going to continue into the southeastern areas of the United States. So basically from the plain states to the East Coast, in that cooler air is where the most active rain patterns are going to be.
Okay, so then the second question with this moisture question would be, so you talked about starting to see a little bit more activity with the monsoon, with the way the weather is down and the movement of the atmosphere in the southwestern part of the country. While it is still hot, will it be seeing any moisture occasionally with that movement?
Yeah, now one thing that is going to help along that monsoon moisture pattern is this heat. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but when you heat up the deserts like it's going on right now, that does create a natural area of low pressure near the ground that draws higher humidity air out of Mexico and Central America northward. And we see this. Now, we've been talking about how it's certainly off to a late start, and it is. But we do see that by this weekend and into the early to middle parts of next week, I do see Arizona, New Mexico getting into a better chance of showers and thunderstorms. So it starts this weekend and it goes into next week, and gradually that moisture will start to spread more northward. But the placement of that high pressure ridge and that placement of that low up in Canada in the next week or two will really dictate where that best flow of moisture will be.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a pretty good cover across the country here today on our weather. So appreciate you joining us here, giving us an outlook on what we're expecting to see here in the next 7 to 10 days.
Sounds good.
Again, meteorologist Don Day joining us each and every week as he does. His website can be found at dayweather.com, where you can find his daily video podcast that he kicks out every Monday through Friday morning. Our weather today brought to you by Allflex. Cattle identification and record keeping should be easy. To find out more, go to their website at allflexusa.com. Well, stay with us. Coming up as we wrap up our program, I'll tell you what's in store for next week's show when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. A couple weeks ago, the captain mentioned the latest BQA audit was out. We're going to talk with folks next week on that. Be sure to tune in on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Thank you to our sponsors here today: Allflex, Inherit Select from Zoetis, the American Gelbvieh Association, MLS Tubs, and Tank Toad. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. The summer issue is out, and if you don't have it, you can go to their website at workingranchmag.com, and you can get your subscription subscription started today. Always plumb full of great articles, great pictures. I encourage you to go through that. 150 years this year that the American Angus Association is celebrating. You can read more about it in the summer issue of Working Ranch Magazine. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can do it by calling or texting. My phone number, 307-363-COWS, or my email, justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Join us next week at the same time. I'm your host, Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.